Our next speaker, I think it's res ipsa loquitur that it's true in her case. Letitia James is honoring us with her perspective on New York's progress in criminal justice reform, touching on bail, parole, cannabis, and paths away from incarceration. As I imagine everyone here knows, Attorney General James was a public defender, among other roles, before she exploded onto the political scene. She served the city as a city council, as public advocate, and is now, of course, Attorney General of the state of New York. It now gives me great pleasure and privilege to introduce the Honorable Letitia James, Attorney General of the state of New York.
Let me thank Gary for the introduction, and the Institute, as well as the founder, Rabbi Sholem Lipskar. I also want to recognize in the audience my Chief Deputy Attorney General of Criminal Justice, Jose Maldonado, who is somewhere up there. Jose, stand up. Yeah. I just want you to know I've been elected now 6 months and 20 some odd days, and it's been a wonderful journey. And my office has been part of the national effort to basically challenge the retrenchment of this federal government in a wide range of areas, from the safety net to building the wall, to reproductive rights, to changing the poverty level, to environmental issues. We are to affordable housing, to disparate treatment of those who are seeking assistance from local governments. We are also awaiting, as you know, a decision from the United States Supreme Court on the census decision that New York led on. So we've been involved in a number of cases, and that's just a few. As I say to individuals, I wake up each and every day with a fire in my belly. I walk into the office of Attorney General, I sue somebody, and then I go home. That's basically what I do. And so it's an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you and with so many individuals who are like-minded, from the distinguished guests in attendance, to the civic and nonprofit leaders, to law enforcement officers, to state and local leaders, to health professionals, and to individuals who have returned to our communities from incarceration. You represent the front line of seismic transformation underway across this nation. And I'm from a little place, as was just mentioned, called Brooklyn. Brooklyn is also known as the Republic of Brooklyn, where we pride ourselves on speaking plain, and where we pride ourselves in speaking truth to power. And so let me get right to it, because despite many wonderful public servants who work in it, you all know that our criminal justice system is just broken. As a former public defender of the Legal Aid Society, each and every day I focus on the criminal justice system. The justice system, as you know, was meant to correct behavior and to keep our community safe, not simply penalize individuals. But unfortunately and misguidedly, the evolution of the system made it one that's heavy on punishment, devoid of basic human dignity, light on rehabilitation, hostile to reform, and even lighter on transparency. We have witnessed that system go horribly wrong. In light of all of the cases that we are witnessing that have been brought by the Innocence Project, where innocent individuals are being released from incarceration, and the creation of so many conviction integrity units, in particular the unit that was created by the former district attorney of Brooklyn, the late Ken Thompson, and now continues under the leadership of Eric Gonzalez. We have been focusing on those cases that go horribly wrong. And we need to look no further than the case of the Central Park Five, which is in our local newspapers today, where 5 individuals were wrongfully convicted of a heinous crime that they never committed. It is profoundly disturbing and upsetting, but we must not avert our eyes in the face of such grave injustice, for it lays bare where the system failed and underscores the critical need for improved prosecutorial transparency. And in fact, in about 2 hours from now, or maybe it's happening now, there's a group of elected officials as well as activists who are having a press conference at City Hall asking for more transparency with respect to prosecutors and holding prosecutors accountable for their wrongful convictions. And they are also asking the Office of Attorney General to serve as a statewide conviction, to create a a statewide conviction integrity unit and asking the governor of the state of New York to issue an executive order and/or for the legislature to give the Office of Attorney General jurisdiction in that regard. And so I am looking forward to the response from the legislature as well as the governor of the state of New York. Now, I remain hopeful that we are beginning to turn the curve. Cities and states across the nation are implementing bold reforms and producing results. We've passed smart bipartisan criminal justice reforms at the federal government, but as was mentioned by the previous panel, it's really all about implementation. And we've made great strides in using body camera technology to advance transparency and accountability. And for those of you who know anything about New York, you know that as the former public advocate, I was in the forefront of urging the city council from adopting and financing body cameras in the light of the Eric Garner case. As an early proponent of these police-worn body cameras, I've seen this advancement firsthand. And while it is right to champion these successes, we must remain firmly grounded in reality. The truth is we're only getting started. This movement must remain focused on dismantling historic injustices and creating and correcting generational wrongs. If we are to arrive at the most perfect union for which we all aspire, we must stay the course in reimagining justice. And that will require of us to continue to push for greater transparency, to better coordinate healthcare services, and to dismantle deeply embedded institutional discrimination and bias once and for all. As a strong and early supporter of reform, the advent of police-worn body cameras has brought forth a level of transparency and accountability never before imagined in American policing. And while no panacea, body cameras provide a more objective look into police-civilian encounters than any alternative and help to reach justice in countless cases. And as an Attorney General, we are using settlement funds to provide resources to local municipalities to equip their officers with body cameras. As a special prosecutor in New York in charge of cases where unarmed civilians die due to the police encounter, my office has used body camera footage to better address these cases. Of course, when footage is not available, our jobs and the quest for justice has been much harder. And that is why we recently called for body cameras to be expanded in New York policing and recommended in a policy report that state police begin using body cameras. So far, this proposal has been met with the seriousness it is due, and we continue to have discussions with the state police on how best to deploy cameras. Of course, I have also been concerned about ensuring that body camera footage isn't buried. It must be available to the public when reasonably privacy and safety concerns have been addressed. Most recently, in fact, just last week, Justice Perry ruled that NYPD must turn over body camera footage from a 2017 encounter that resulted in the death of a Bronx man who was allegedly carrying a knife and what turned out to be a toy gun. This was an important ruling that leads a significant signal to police and will lead to additional footage being publicly available. I hope we can expand upon this ruling, continuing to expand access to footage. And I hope we can do even more to address issues like storage and cost. And no doubt this will be an important component of our criminal justice reform push in the months and years ahead. Another challenge on the road to reforming our system is our nation's failure to properly treat the mental health crisis affecting communities across America. Mental illness and poverty should not be crimes. The mental health crisis and prison reform are inextricably linked, and it is a simple fact that we fail to meet the health needs of those suffering with mental illness. We will fail to meaningfully reduce crime, reduce prison populations, and reduce recidivism. According to the Council of State Governments, people with serious mental illness are admitted into prisons and jails 2 million times each year. And of this group, about 75% have a substance or alcohol abuse disorder. And what's more is that they stay longer and are more likely to return to jail than those without mental health illnesses. For women and children, the prevalence of unaddressed trauma and unmet mental health needs runs much higher. Data released last year by the Bureau of Justice Statistics reveal that over 2/3 of incarcerated women report having a history of mental health problems. And with respect to youth, the National Alliance of Mental Health Mental Health estimates that of the 2 million juveniles arrested across the nation each year, 70% have an unmet mental need. For decades, leaders in our community have spent millions building prisons when we should have spent millions building hospitals and mental health facilities and schools. The fact is, prisons are ill-suited to provide the mental health and substance abuse treatment that individuals need. We need better investments in community-based organizations to help treat individuals before they end up incarcerated, in addition to assisting those returning from prison. We must do a better job training law enforcement, judges, correctional officers to recognize when an individual is having a mental health crisis. We must then ensure that a system is set up that provides the ability to meet those mental health needs. And we must do a better job of providing trauma-informed care for incarcerated women. I applaud all of you present today who are taking on this critical work. It is a long road, to be sure, but it is perhaps some of the most important work in transforming the criminal justice system. There are few better examples of the importance and effectiveness of diversionary programs than those designed to end the school-to-prison pipeline, particularly those focused on meeting the mental health needs of children in crisis. Forward-thinking school districts are partnering with their local law enforcement agencies to lower and ultimately put an end to school-based arrest. Educators, administrators, school resource officers, and police are being trained to recognize when a young person is having a mental health crisis. And instead of calling the police, they are calling mobile psychiatric teams to come assist. And that means fewer children are going into contact with correctional systems, and that means better lifelong outcomes for them. I don't think we can speak about the state of reform without also addressing the abject failure of the nation's war on drugs. In fact, for decades in this country, our communities have been trying to get out from the overwhelming burden of the misguided war on drugs. Because the sad truth is that this war on drugs has far too long been a war on people of color, a war on poor Americans, a war on our sons, our brothers, our fathers, and friends, mostly men of color, mostly young men of color. We see this scene play out over and over again. A young white 17-year-old gets caught selling a dime bag, and he's described as an impulsive kid who made a mistake. A young black 17-year-old is caught selling the same dime bag, and he's called a juvenile delinquent, and sometimes even worse. One is forgiven and shown mercy for succumbing to the impetuousness of his youth. The other is tagged for life, burdened with a stigma that our society does not allow to be easily forgotten. As someone who filed the most extensive case in the opioid crisis facing our country, I see those disparities playing out and often compare them to our response to the crack epidemic. And now there are more individuals who are focusing on getting services for individuals who are suffering from the opioid epidemic. And the numbers speak for themselves. According to the ACLU, between the 8 years of 2001 and 2010, marijuana use was roughly the same for black and whites 18 to 25-year-old. Still, black youth were 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana use than their white peers. And that's why the current debate about legalizing marijuana, for me, is a social justice issue. It's also a resource management issue. It costs a lot of money to incarcerate people. In fact, it costs on average $460 a day to keep someone in jail, according to the Vera Institute, and that's a grand total of about $167,000 and $900 per year for those doing the math. Now consider this. In 9 states where recreational adult use has been legalized, arrests have plummeted by 94%. And that means that these states saved hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars by keeping people out of prison, not to mention the thousands of hours freed up for courts who aren't jammed up hearing and trying marijuana possession offenses. Furthermore, they've saved countless people from a lifelong span of a criminal record. Thousands of people who have not been separated from their families, thousands of people who have not lost their jobs or their homes because of imprisonment, not to mention the trauma of young people going through the system. But let's be careful to not oversimplify this issue. Legalization is not enough. And while we can set a course for a brighter future, we cannot avoid righting past wrongs, which is why, as you've seen today in the daily news, I've called upon the state legislature to ensure that they expunge criminal records for those individuals who were formerly convicted of possession of marijuana. Because despite similar rates of cannabis consumption across racial and ethnic lines, 80% of the nearly 23,000 people arrested for cannabis in New York in 2016 were Black or Latino, according to the Drug Policy Institute, the Drug Policy Alliance. And what these numbers tell us is that we cannot assume that changing the law to decriminalize or legalize cannabis will be enough to deliver the justice and opportunity that we hope it will bring. We must put in place a system that addresses the historical wrongs of the war on drugs. We must also ensure that opportunity and access and justice, and that we invest in communities who have historically been marginalized and who, without thoughtful planning and implementation, will simply be left behind once again. And those are the issues that right now, at this moment, the Assembly and the Senate and the governor are having at this very moment. Everyone is on the side of legalization, but there is a spirited debate over where the money will go and whether or not we should expunge or seal criminal records. Again, I've been clear to all three levels of government that I believe in expungement and that we should provide resources to those communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs. The bottom line is we cannot simply legalize. We must legalize in a way that works for everyone, that those historically marginalized are not left on the sidelines, that we invest in human capital, that we create opportunities to address the wealth gap. The time for New York to get it right is now. Another area I think we should discuss is that of transparency. Transparency in and of itself can provide an important catalyst for change. Data can drive efforts at addressing reform in the criminal justice space, from identifying law enforcement individuals repeatedly engaged in misconduct to school discipline. School discipline data demonstrates that there is a glaring disparity in rates of school suspension and expulsions and arrests for students of color compared to their white peers. Each time a student is removed from the classroom, they miss out on critical learning, falling further and further behind academically. Disrupting the school to prison pipeline demands that schools and communities work to address the glaring disparities and ensure that all students are being set up to succeed. And my office has reached a number of agreements with school districts across the state in an effort to disrupt this pipeline. Shining a light on other law enforcement data is equally available and informative, such as publicly reporting traffic stop statistics, including the race of the driver. Prosecutorial data has the potential to be extremely instructive as well, especially with respect to making sentencing statistics, including data on offense, discovery, speedy trial, and race, publicly available. You see, at the end of the day, we need an honest accounting of what is really happening if we are to develop effective solutions to ensure equal protection and equal application of the law. I already spoke about one mental health crisis, but lastly, it's really critically important that we, again, engage in a discussion about reforming our system, including the aging prison population. According to the Pew Charitable Trust, the number of people 55 years of age or older increased by 280% nationwide between 1999 and 2016. In New York alone, the population of individuals aged 50% increased by 10,000 from 2007 to 2016. Older populations, they come with more complicated health needs, including chronic illnesses, and it portends a big challenge for the correctional health system everywhere. Like New York, other states are taking a multi-pronged approach, from building more long-term care facilities like a secured nursing home to units designed just for mature inmates to early release for individuals at low risk for returning to prison. Organizations across this nation are illustrating that it is possible to adapt that system so that incarcerated individuals in the system can age with dignity. And lastly, allow me to applaud a bill in the state legislature. It's entitled the Less is More Act. And as stated in a recent editorial by the sponsor of the bill, Senator Benjamin, it reads, on any given day, the number of New Yorkers in state jails because of technical violations of their parole is over 6,000. If we are serious about ending mass incarceration, we should not be locking up people for violating their parole simply because of a speeding ticket or because of some technical violation such as they were late in their curfew. This bill should be advanced and should be passed by the state legislature as soon as possible. And again, a shout out to Senator Benjamin and of course to my Assembly member who's also sponsoring that in the Assembly, Assembly Member Walter Mosley. As we move forward along the road to reimagining justice in this nation, let us continue to do everything in our power to deliver equal justice to everyone, especially for those without access to fancy lawyers and expensive lobbyists. This is the fuel that powers our mission and provides the light that ignites our dreams, that actualizes the full potential of all of God's children, and particularly those who have been consistently and historically locked out of the sunshine of opportunity. I thank you all for allowing me to say a few words. And again, it's really all about, I'm in the business of justice. And if you're in the business of justice, please reach out to my office. God bless you and thank you.